Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Staffordshire Police, Fire and Crime Panel meeting. It's Monday the 30th of September, 10 a.m. in the Oak Room in Staffordshire. My name is Councillor Bernard Peters and I chair this panel. May I welcome the Commissioner, Mr. Ben Adams, and his team today to this meeting. And if we could look at the agenda as the first starting point, of course. Are there any apologies for absence?
There are, Chairman. I've received apologies from Mr Bowen, Councillor Robertson, who sent his substitute, Councillor Taylor, and Councillors Dean and Khan.
Right, thank you. Colleagues, any declarations of interest? None, thank you. The minutes of the panel meeting and confirmation hearing held on the 24th of June. The details are in the pack. Can we just note that, please? Thank you. Decisions published by the Commissioner.
There have been no decisions published on the Commissioner's website since your last meeting.
Okay, thank you. Item 5 on the agenda. Questions to the Commissioner from members of the public.
Thank you, Chair. We've had 3 questions, one from Mrs Mallender, and I think the Commissioner is going to do a verbal update on that question, and 2 from Mr Stock, who's had the responses, and they're in your agenda pack.
Okay. Commissioner, would you like to respond?
Thank you. Good morning. Morning, Chairman. Morning, panel. Chairman, just before I start, if I may, congratulations to 2 of the panel members who got elected as MPs. This is obviously an excellent panel to be on as a step to even greater things. Yeah, I've had 2 or 3 questions here. I don't believe there's supplementaries on the ones relating to strip search, which I very much see as an operational matter. Mrs Mallender's question, which is, given that Staffordshire is now receiving the wrong sort of international attention for its organised waste crime debacle and failures to tackle Wally's Quarry, isn't it time that the unrepresentative and ineffective office of the Crime Commissioner was axed? She clearly, Mrs Mallender is very concerned, and she's raised this before, about the ongoing issues at Wally's Quarry, as I am. I know it's a big concern for the local residents who continue to be affected by the smell, and there are concerns about their health and related considerations. I do get involved with cross-stakeholder meetings, including the Environment Agency, local MP, council and local county council. Was only sat in being updated on one about a fortnight ago. So there are continuing issues there. I think the statement around organised waste crime is probably ill-advised and not necessarily accurate. Certainly, as far as I'm aware, there's no specific police action related to that. The action that we've discussed in this panel before is about how the police are very keen to uphold people's rights to protest, but to do that safely and legally, which they do. In as far as the wider context is concerned, she and I are going to disagree about that. I think the role of police and crime commissioners is pretty much established now. Actually gives us really important local representation about community safety issues, and for me that's going to be quite an interesting conversation in the coming months as we're seeing more talk about policing matters, and fire and rescue for that matter, being nationalised, and I am concerned that that means we might lose the importance of the local. I'm there representing local issues like Wally's Quarry in a way that a national representative might not be able to do. So she and I will disagree on that, but of course she's perfectly entitled to make her comments as she's done in the question.
I'm sure she's very grateful for you noting those comments, Commissioner, and thank you for briefing the panel this morning. Shall we move on now? Yeah, item 6 on the agenda, Commissioner, your annual report. Would you like to speak to that, please?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Chairman, I'm very conscious that we've got an absolute mass of paperwork today, reports, plans, etc. And they're going to overlap really to a great degree. I'm quite keen that we spend, or I'm able to spend as much time as possible answering the question of yourself and panel members related to them. So I'll just give some very brief comments. I think, interestingly, for me, around the annual report, 3 years, not the 4-year term that I might have hoped for. We, thankfully, have all trying desperately to put COVID into the past with our memories. I think in my second year, I was slightly frustrated that I'd not made the progress I'd hoped to, particularly in some partnership arenas, and notably in the wider criminal justice aspect. Members will be aware I've only got a power to convene around that. We have what's called a local criminal justice board. It's very positive conversations that we have there. CPS, courts, judges, sometimes magistrates and Crown Court are there. However, I'm not in a position to directly influence outside of the areas of influence where I would use my relationship with the Chief Constable. So in some aspects, particularly around the policing side, preparing cases quickly for court, making sure they're of good standard. We made real progress, and we continue to make progress. The number of days it takes to get a case file ready and approved by CPS has almost halved over the last 2 or 3 years. But in terms of court backlogs, which is the real challenge for Staffordshire, we've not made the progress that I would have hoped to. My team and I are going to revisit this. We already are. I think everybody in the local criminal justice board partnership is aware that it's an issue that might be beyond our local control. To put it in perspective, we've got the second biggest backlog of cases in the country. Only Manchester's got a bigger backlog. And that means that people are sometimes waiting 2-3 years to go to court when they might have gone there in several months before. It's not effective justice, it's not rapid justice, and it means victims are quite often walking away from the process and suffering. So that continues to be, for me, an area where very challenging, but it's there in black and white in the report, and it's going to stay in my plan because I'm determined to make progress with it. And I'm hoping, actually, that our MPs and government might support an enhanced role for commissioners in that space, in terms of not so much holding to account, but the opportunity to do more, maybe even commission and work alongside some of those agencies to help that process. In the main, I'm very pleased with progress. I think the two services, police and fire and rescue, have taken account of the plans, which is a statutory duty for them to take account of them. And I'm very pleased that the reports from His Majesty's inspectors play out what I've made clear in this report, that both services are improving and continuing to improve. We've had 2 full reports published in just the last 3 weeks. Police is improved in almost every area. Still not where we want it to be, but a very strong foundation to build on and go back to being an outstanding police force. They've made progress in every single area. It's difficult in HMI to make a jump of more than one grading in any specific theme of inspection. But they have done that across the board, greatly to their credit. The fire and rescue report is terrific. It's probably going to be one of the best in the country this year, if not the last 2 or 3 years. And that's against a ever more challenging measure that HMI set. They are expecting high standards. And here in Staffordshire, they've got them. So in terms of performance, and the objectives and the aims I set out in the report, the two services have done exceptionally well. We've seen reductions in neighbourhood crime, reductions in antisocial behaviour, strength and proactive units. I'm very, very pleased with the progress we've made around roads policing, not just to remove criminals from the road, but to increase road safety measures. Far too many people still dying, I'm afraid, on the roads of Staffordshire, 44 last year. But investment is being made in new technology, new cameras, greater numbers of staff, and we're going to be operating in low light with new camera technology as well. So in the winter, dusk and dawn, there will be enforcement around speeding. And in fact, slightly jumping the gun, tomorrow morning there will be a new single road policing, road safety, road crime unit for Staffordshire, because the motorway team that previously we did in partnership with West Midlands, we're now going to have that in Staffordshire. West Midlands will keep the West Midlands end, so we'll have a more joined up roads policing effort with a focus on safety as well as taking criminals off the network. Most significant, I think, for the public is the number of new police officers in Staffordshire in the last 3 years. I achieved my target, which was really rewarding. We've got over 2,000 officers now, many of them now completing their training, and that means we're getting proper local policing. And of course, with the response teams back in each local police area, that's helped us to keep on top of rising demand. Fire and rescue continues to be rapid and effective. We've invested in better training and equipment. There's a focus on a supportive work environment. I think nationally that's been an issue. Staffordshire Fire and Rescue were involved in a thematic inspection of 10 fire and rescue services around culture. They didn't report on each force there, but there are some lessons which the whole sector needs to take account of. And I'm pleased to say that we're at the forefront of delivering those. It's very important that people feel safe and want to work in those services. And that means an inclusive and representative environment. We're also a little concerned about statistics that suggest firefighters can become ill long term due to contaminants that they've picked up at incidents being carried back into the cab, into the vehicle, into their working environments. So there's something called the clean cab concept, which we're working on very quickly with the sector and unions to try and alleviate risk in that direction as well. We've strengthened the prevention and protection teams in fire and rescue, particularly I know the panel is pleased to hear about the progress with the NHS. That's continuing, the two services around return to home, and particularly the falls response team, essentially going from strength to strength. And I think the health service has recognised the value of those. Very, very keen that that's replicated across the country, actually, and we'll be pushing harder for that. Regrettably, some 101 callers are still waiting too long to have their call answered. On a positive side, 999, which was an issue for me and for the inspectors, has pretty much consistently been in the top 10, 20 forces for the last year or so. That's good news. And we're taking about 50 or 60% of calls at triage stage for 101 within a few minutes, within 5, 6, 7 minutes, which is fine. But then when it's busy, there's still too many people, sometimes dozens a day, waiting an hour, possibly more, to pass the information over on 101. Now, I will continue, again, to emphasise that in my plan, continue to resource it, and if any of you are coming to the public performance meeting next Monday, which I think is in the same room, with the Chief Constable, we've got a lot of positive things to talk about, but we're also going to be talking about 101 and the services plans to continue to improve that. I think the other part of the report, which I'm extremely pleased about, is the work that my team has done. As you know, they are generally working to support the wider partnership to address causes of offending, get involved with reducing reoffending, look at the interests of young people, make sure that those that have been dragged into criminal or sexual exploitation are protected. We can't do that on our own. It's a combination of police, local authorities, social services, children's services and others working very closely together. But I think, in fact, in a way, you know, this perhaps reflects more on Mrs. Mallander's question than any other aspect of the annual report. Before the advent of commissioners, that type of role of building effective partnerships did not exist. It does now, and I spend all day, every day, and my team, concerned about how we keep people out of the system, reduce demand on police and fire and rescue. And it's an exceptionally important element of what we're doing. And I think you'll see the detail there. And that is not talking about supporting victims, which is my primary duty. Making sure that people who are unfortunate enough to experience crime or antisocial behaviour can quickly get back to their lives, feel supported, understand the system, the criminal justice system they may be involved in, is absolutely paramount. And again, before commissioners, that role didn't really exist. It sat with services. They did a fine job, I think, around process, but not necessarily getting up every morning looking at the world from the victim's perspective, which is what my team do. So hopefully the report demonstrates that the impact that our combined efforts have had this year. I think we're building two outstanding services here, but it won't happen overnight. I'm pretty determined that by the time we meet again in 4 years' time, and I hope it's all of us, that we'll see the services pretty close to that ambition. They've made tremendous progress, and I guess it's reflected mostly for me. We've had some open days recently, thousands of people turning up at fire stations. Over 10,000 people turned up in the rain at the police HQ the other day. It was very noisy. It was dogs and sirens for about 4 hours. But it was a tremendous morning. And just to see the public giving the service their thumbs up, particularly after the incidents in the summer in Stoke-on-Trent and Tamworth, those were particularly nasty incidents. Louise and I have heard from officers that for them it's probably the worst violence they've experienced in 30 years, particularly in Tamworth. So it was great to see the public there giving the service an absolute pat on the back and showing their support. And hopefully a lot of young people that came along will sign up in the future. Thank you, Chair. Really happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Commissioner. And may we thank you for a very comprehensive report. But of course now we're expecting delivery and consistency in that delivery. The talking's over, as it were, if I could be so crude as to say that. People are expecting to see action. May I just pick a few points up? It's really encouraging the comment you made about partnership working with the NHS, particularly the ICB. I think they're very mindful that there's been a step change in your approach towards that. Yep. I'm the County Council's appointed governor at UHDB in Burton and Derby, and we mentioned this at a meeting a few weeks ago. So just to pass that back on to you, that particular trust, I'm very grateful for the approach that you're adopting. Partnership working, of course, is so important, and we hope that you're able to capture perhaps people whose first language isn't English, that they get the same level of communication and they're informed as clearly as possible, because we don't want people to be left behind or feel isolated. A couple of points in your general comments. Antisocial behaviour, we often hear, and the figures are going down, and I think you mentioned that. The figures are not going down in every district in Staffordshire. They're going down in a fair amount of them, and as you say, it won't happen overnight. But antisocial behaviour is still a scourge on many people's lives. And in a lot of incidents, it's aggravated, of course, by people with an addiction habit, whether it's drugs or drink. And we hope that the back office who are dealing with that are there to help people, whether it's the court services or whatever. People don't want to feel isolated. Those that have stepped up for help want help. Police visibility is something that always comes up in conversations. Well, it's a waste of time, you never see a policeman. And rightly or wrongly, I say, well, maybe you won't see them walking the beat as often as you used to, but they are there. And maybe they're in plain clothes. Maybe they're in an unmarked car. That's a drumbeat message that hasn't really got to a lot of people. And of course, people need to be discreet about it. The police will. But I think police and the public don't quite align in terms of visibility. And a more sensitive subject that we hear a lot about, and it's on the television all the while, and there's a lot being made of it, of course, and it is really, really serious. Domestic abuse. More so when children are present. Now, what sparked me to make this comment is a comment that you made earlier about police numbers are increasing, the recruiting levels are up. But I think we touched last time on if you've got a 20, 21-year-old police officer knocking on the door where there's a serious domestic violence incident going on, is he competent enough to deal with it in terms of life experiences? How are you addressing that? Or is there a need to address it? They've come through Hendon, they've come through their qualification period. Do they just drop into that environment and fit? Because I feel as a retired magistrate that there isn't one fit for all. You need a lot of life experiences to deal with things like that. And the other thing which is constantly hammering people at the moment is related to fraud. People are losing trust in IT. Is this the button to click? How the heck are we going to be sure that our commitment to this web page or this organisation is correct? And there's a lot of people losing a lot of money, and fraud is a serious issue across the country. In terms of fire, as you say, the overlap is significant, and people cannot go or say enough about the valid contribution that they're making to supporting the community. But what is the communication strategy, or what is the policy on the very basic, as I would say here, is educate and inform people about preventing fires. Used to be, you go to sleep with a cigarette in the ashtray and it falls onto the carpet. I'm not sure people smoke as much as they used to at home, but how do you address preventing fire? Now that's the drift of the panel's comments today. I'll open it up to colleagues if they have any comments. Colleagues, please signify if you wish to ask the Commissioner a question. Charlotte?
Yeah, I want to ask a few questions about domestic violence. But to start before that, I want to find out what the gender balance is within your police force, because it seems to me that domestic violence is normally perpetrated by the male against the female, and therefore I'd like to know what the gender balance is. Could you answer that one first, if Chair? Is that okay?
Yeah, just on that, I'm not sure of the total mix. I assume you're talking about officers and not just.
I'm talking about officers.
Yeah, it's not just officers, of course, who deal with particularly victims or even perpetrators on domestic abuse. It's quite often experienced staff, quite often independent domestic violence advisors. Certainly my own commissioned service, New Era, which looks after several thousand victims of domestic abuse. They're predominantly female, as it happens, not exclusively. The officer mix is more male still across the whole service, but in the last 3 years, our new recruits have been more female than male. And I think we're one of the few force areas in the country where that's been the case, and I think that's really helpful because we're getting more and more towards a service that's got equivalent male-female balance. Domestic violence is around 40%.
Sorry, do we have some figures on that? You're
Yeah,
saying
I'll
more.
clarify for you, but I think at the last measure of recruits is about 51% female. So it's in a good position. Actually, Councillor Atkins, I think it's important, and it goes to the Chairman's comment as well about training. Not so much at this panel, but around the country, quite often there's a challenge about the amount of training that new recruits are doing. Some of them are doing 3 years. They do get a degree at the end of it because it reflects the standard and complexity of the training that they do. And I think a lot of that is because of the recognition now of how important it is to understand relationships, to manage very difficult situations, and perhaps, as you say, walk into situations they're not got personal experience for. I think if there's any situation where there's distress and risk of harm, any police officer who's ready to help knocking on the door is welcome, regardless of what their gender is, their sex is, their age is, or their experience. If they're there to help and they're trained, then that's going to be well received. I haven't had any reason to be concerned about the suitability of individuals responding. Having said that, the demand is so considerable, and actually we're very keen as a service, I say we, the service is very keen, to do more in terms of their grade 2 response, non-emergency response to domestic violence. So they are, at the moment, building some teams, and we're going to be piloting this in Stoke-on-Trent first of all, with a bit more of a focus on domestic violence. It's not going away as a trend. As the Chairman says, it's continuing to increase, and there's a real risk of violence at the far end of it. So the service is reflecting that in its response. But I'm very happy to come back. In fact, domestic violence, perhaps the mix of recruits and the plan to address it might be something that the panel would like to look at some point in the future, because I'd be very happy to bring back some detail. It's fundamental business as usual now.
Commissioner, what I'm really concerned about is not so much, well, I am concerned about domestic violence, obviously, but what I'm concerned about, because it has come up with me locally, is domestic abuse, controlling behaviour and such like. Because I do know that women, I don't want to say women, feel trapped and not able to get out of the household. Now, there's something happening locally in Leek where a facility is closing down, and people who use that facility are worried that they'll be spending more time at home. And so really, if someone, what does a woman do who is subject to that controlling behaviour? It's not, she hasn't got any black eyes, she hasn't got a broken arm, so it doesn't show, but it is something which is impacting on her life. So the problem arises, how do they reach out to the police? How do they make sure that the controlling behaviour, which is obviously a crime, is addressed without putting herself at further risk? That's really the issue that has to be addressed. And that's not about a police officer knocking on the door. It's about giving her the confidence to be able to contact an advisor or a police officer to deal with that problem that she's facing every day at home.
It's so important. I couldn't agree more. And apologies. Domestic abuse, in its widest sense, is the issue. Unfortunately, there's a real risk it all leads to violence. Coercive control, that's what New Era is there for. That's why we have a service that's consistent across the whole county. I believe I've spent £4.5 million this year alone on support services for domestic abuse, but also sexual abuse. And quite a lot of the service provided is to people before there is an incident. So then they are asking, is what I'm experiencing normal? How can you help me? What is the advice? Who do I go to next for help? It may not be the police. So my advice would be call New Era, and they'll give you some excellent advice, and it will be from people who know exactly what you're talking about and can provide the support. I went to a really good event in Cannock recently, where a local church was opening up a service for survivors of domestic abuse. And 2 or 3 of the people there who were going to be talking to anyone who walked in for advice, they said until they'd had training and spoken with experts, they didn't realise that they'd been a victim themselves for 30 years. Actually, the life they led, where they hadn't got any control over their finances when they went out, extraordinary stuff. Middle-aged women saying they weren't able to wear what they wanted to wear or spend money on what they wanted to spend it on. They hadn't recognised that they were in an abusive relationship. So it's important, the opportunity to talk to like-minded and experienced people. That's what the service is for. Now, by the way, that's funded by some grant funding, but also City Council in Stoke-on-Trent and County Council. It's very, very important. But I also spend quite a lot of police money on that, because it's the right thing to do to keep people out of the system and get involved before things turn particularly nasty.
Thank you. Question here?
Morning. I've just got a couple of things really. One's just to continue on from Councillor Atkins. I'm assuming, just to clarify, that individuals of any gender experiencing domestic abuse can access the services, because I know we tend to think it's more women, but it can be any gender, can't it? And then that other comment is, following on from the chair comments and concerns, it's good to know we've recruited more officers, but the public perception is that there are more assaults on the police, and they're increasing, and they do tend to be young officers. So my question is, you know, what are Staff's Police doing around supporting these young officers, both with retention and public confidence in what they're doing?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Neeson. Yes, the service is there for people of all sexes. It is predominantly male and female, unfortunately, but there's also services for young people, children, showing concerning behaviour, and also same-sex relationships as well. So anybody who needs help can pick up the phone, and they're going to get it. And thank you for just making the point there about officers. They'll appreciate that, because there has been a step up in assaults in the last 12 months or so. Every one of them is looked at quite carefully to see if there's an operational, something operationally can be done to try and avoid it in the future, or there's a training issue. One of the first things the officers do, almost day one of their training, is their own personal protection. And we've built a new training facility next to headquarters in Stafford. It's properly kitted out. It's quite something to see. If there's an opportunity one day, the panel might enjoy seeing that. The language gets a bit rich, because they do go through real life scenarios, but they can all handle themselves, and they can all protect themselves. I think actually, to some degree, because arrests are up about 16-17% in the last year in Staffordshire. This is more proactive policing. And sometimes, if you're going out to bring a perpetrator in, you are going to have people resisting arrest. But my primary concern is that they are safe in doing that, and they've got the support to do it. So yes, it's very much on the agenda, and the Chief Constable's got it right up there as a priority. Retention in Staffordshire is very good. It's better than it was under previous training regimes, despite some of the rhetoric. It's hard work doing 2 or 3 years of training and education at the same time. But most recruits come through it at the other end, and then they stick around. People at the moment like working for Staffordshire Police, which is a great place to be.
Would you be able to take the questions I asked?
Sorry, Bernard.
Could you answer the questions that I put to you earlier?
Yes. I think we've picked up 1 or 2 of them. Your point
Yeah.
about confidence, and I think it's really key. And you'll see, again, we've got overlaps with my new plan here. Confidence, for me, is one of the three most important parts of what we're trying to do. If people feel safe, they go about their normal business. Quite often, you read national headlines and believe you can't walk to the shop, especially if it's dark. It is not the case. This is still a safe place we live in. So I'm very keen to get the information out. You talked about engagement, keeping people informed. I think that is really important. I think the work we're doing at the moment with the force around engagement in particular will help. My new deputy that you met, David Evans, and I are going around every local community safety partnership at the moment, meeting officers and portfolio holders. I'm talking with them about reducing crime, preventing crime, and tackling antisocial behaviour, but also enhancing local confidence. Now, this is not just a job for police and fire. It is a job for the partners. And as you said, Chairman, I'm really, really determined we're going to have more impactful partnerships. And you'll see that in the plan. Impactful. So actually driving down these concerns, letting people know what we're all doing to keep them safe and what they can do to keep themselves safe as well. Absolutely part of that is this conundrum around, do you want visible police or effective police? And I'll just let that sit there for a second, because they aren't the same thing. I think we all want our police to be as effective as possible at preventing and tackling crime. However, visibility is very important in terms of confidence. So that's why we've got local policing teams. That's why they're doing more patrolling. That's why we've got more PCSOs than most other force areas. And that's why we're determined to keep building the strength of our neighbourhood policing teams. But visibility will never be at the expense of effectiveness or being in the right place, dealing with emergencies, being where risk is highest. Isolation, I'm delighted you mentioned isolation. It's key for fire and rescue. You talked about prevention. A lot of the plan and their work is around identifying the most vulnerable people. Those places, those buildings, those individuals where there might well be an accident or a fire, and addressing the vulnerability. Isolation is key to that. Isolation is also key to another aspect of my plan around rural crime. Fundamental to Staffordshire, and it's in the plan because it is largely about, if you're isolated, your business is more likely to be, unfortunately, more likely to be targeted by organised criminals, and the isolation just adds to that sense of concern. And you mentioned drug and drink and other addiction as being a sort of underlying factor in ASB. Yes, I'm afraid it is, but it's also an underlying factor in crime, and it's also a considerable factor in road safety. We've got almost as many drug drivers at the moment, or driving under the influence of drugs, which sometimes can be a day or so later, as drink. I'm really pleased. I chair the Drug and Alcohol Partnership. I'm very much hoping that the new government will recognise the value of the 10-year combating drugs policy. It meant that drug treatment investment doubled in the last 18 months. We've seen the advantages of that in Stoke and Staffordshire already. But we need to be doing more. And the other area that I'm pleased with direction travel is we're doing more treatment orders. So this is where people might have committed an offence. Rather than waiting 12 months to go to court, they are offered some treatment. It might be drug-related, drink-related, mental health-related. Keeps them out of the system, very much reduces their chances of offending again. So that underlying addiction theme is one that runs through my whole plan. Training and experience, I've touched on that slightly. I think the key there is balance. We want experienced people working with the trainees. But it is, I think, a little bit let's just say I've been very, very impressed whenever I meet trainees, even those very early on, just their capacity to deal with issues and keep us safe. It's quite remarkable and almost beyond their age and experience. Not all of our trainees and recruits are young, by the way. We have people joining as new recruits. I met a mom of 2 who'd moved on from the contact centre, PCSOs progressing to be officers. So it's getting that mix of people is really key. And we are recruiting experienced people from other forces at the moment as well. Because I said, people want to come and work for Staffordshire Police at the moment. You mentioned fraud. Now, this is a bit of a frustration for me and an area where actually I'm hoping government works with us on this. And you could argue that, well, there aren't many people who look at the National Action Fraud Service at the moment and say, yeah, there's a good example of doing something centrally that's better. I don't think it is. I don't think many would say it is. So it's a good example of where one size does not necessarily fit all. A lot of fraud comes back to the local. Actually, you're as likely to be ripped off online as somebody in Russia or China or another part of the country. It's not likely to be somebody down the road. And for a local police force, that's quite difficult. But a lot of fraud where stuff's being shipped to the wrong properties, stuff is taken online, directed on different cards, it does come back to the local. And I think there's an opportunity for local police forces to pick up more of that work. But that is a difficult challenge. So, hopefully, Chair, I've covered a bunch of what you've asked there. Anything I've missed?
No, I don't think so, Commissioner. Thank you. All that was under the heading of, are both chiefs equipped to deliver, mindful of the challenging historical, reputational issues that you've had to deal with. And I think based on what we've heard, unless anyone on the panel wants to disagree with me, your document gives us a fairly good level of assurance.
Just on that, and this is something I've picked up with His Majesty's inspectors. There are positive references in both of the recent reports, and I do urge the panel to read them if they get the chance, to say that we're in good shape financially. There is investment, there is improved productivity, which was an issue for fire and rescue 2 years ago. They are more effective, they are going to more calls, they are getting there quicker. And it's about investment and a balance with sound finances. Now, Chairman, you've known me for a while. I don't mess about with the money. It's got to be there and it's got to be right. And the people around the county who supported us with council tax, they expect it to deliver value for money. Both services are in good shape, but there is no guarantee of the future. We are somewhat anxious about the next 4 or 5 years. But we're in a better position, I think, to ride any storms than most other places. Having said that, we're making savings. Police have a target, and my own office has a target, which it's hitting. My office continues to be, at the moment, smaller every year than when I arrived, and I would argue more effective. So it's about value for money and productivity, and we're going to continue in that way. But I think HMI, they need to just reflect on how many forces are talking about being in financial trouble and emphasise the importance of leaders being effective in their budgeting. Because if you haven't got strong budgets, you're not going to have a strong police or fire service.
Okay. Right. Any questions? One over there, yes?
Morning, Councillor Taylor. I'm here in Councillor Robertson's stead. It's pleasing to hear about the recruitment of new officers and about the training to give them the skills and knowledge to undertake their jobs. But one of the issues we face in Lichfield is a lack of stability in the management structure. I think at the end of this week we lose a temporary commander of LPT, or after almost exactly 1 year, who herself was replacing Commander Matt Morgan, who lasted just 5.5 months. and each new commander will come in with their own ideas about how to run the LPT. How can you avoid that turnover? And each of these, I know Matt Morgan went on to do something in his career, and I wouldn't want to stifle anybody's career, but we do need some stability so that we can understand who we're dealing with, and the people who are looking over that area can really get to know the area.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor. Nice to meet you. This gets raised quite a lot. And I must say, it's something I used to be concerned about, but I'm not anymore. Firstly, you're right. Generally, the officers that are moving on are moving up. In Lichfield, Matt Morgan's gone on to be instrumental in our contact centre, and he's bringing experience from West Midlands to help with that as well. Now, Karen Green was, I think, deputy to Matt Morgan. She's been the temporary inspector there. Tremendous officer as well. She's very keen to work on other things, including the engagement stuff that we've talked about, more local connections. She's got a real interest in Neighbourhood Watch and what people can do for themselves around the service. So I think she'll be of value in whatever she does next. The key there is that her deputy will have worked alongside her for a period. It's not about the commander, it's about the team. Quite often the officers work an area and understand an area. The sergeants will be located in an area for extended periods of time. Commanders, anything between, I think at the moment, anything between 3 years and 12 months is typical. When I arrived, it was even shorter period. But it's fundamentally about making sure we've got the right people in the right place, and we give those officers the chance to experience every aspect of the role. I do appreciate it might mean rebuilding a relationship locally, and I think there is something we can do about that in terms of establishing the new links. Part of my conversation with the community safety partnerships, I'm very keen that the engagement at that level between stakeholders is better. I think you, as a councillor, should know more about what's going on community safety-wise, because you're speaking to 500, 1,000 people. That's different from going necessarily to one member of the public who is satisfying their own appetite for the information. It's the ability to disseminate. It's really valuable. So I'm looking for the CSPs to step up, but also will do and work with the Chief Constable to strengthen those relationships. I can talk to you about 3 or 4 deputies, particularly, this is not fair really, but I'm going to do it anyway. Newcastle, Cannock, I'm just thinking, Moorlands, their deputies are tremendous. They've, I think in 2 or 3 cases, stepped into being the commander. That way of working in a senior leadership team, it means there is consistency, even though it's a different person. So actually, I think we're stronger for it. And it's no bad thing sometimes to have a new relationship, take a new view, an area. There's a benefit sometimes, somebody with a slightly fresher view, you get a chance to lobby them again about a local issue. In Lichfield, it will be dealing with people coming off the train, various other things for the nighttime economy. Sometimes a fresh view is worth what is valuable too.
Okay, thank you. Charlotte.
Yes. Have we yet had the new inspection report on the fire service? I see that the one that you mentioned, where there were 20 recommendations, it talks about these measures were to address the need to improve equality, inclusion and diversity. Clearly that is very important. Did the new report, if we've had the results of that, indicate that improvements were made in that area? Because it seems to me that you talk here about those recommendations having been addressed, but behaviour is an ongoing issue. It's not a one-off. It has to be addressed continuously to ensure that we don't have any slippage back into what is obviously a feature of the fire service, not just locally, but nationally as well.
So the one I referred to there was this thematic piece of work around culture and diversity. And unfortunately, it was because of some of the very unfortunate situations, bullying, discrimination that came out from various fire and rescue services around the country. Staffordshire was very keen to be involved in that. I'm very comfortable, actually, that the work we've been doing for 3 years means we're sort of, in a way, able to inform that work. Our Chief Fire Officer was the primary driver around the National Code of Ethics piece of work that the fire chiefs did 3 or 4 years ago. And he's working with us on, the main recommendation is around independence, around the professional standards. In policing, professional standards and complaints are dealt with by a separate department, and it's almost detached from the leadership of the organisation. In fire and rescue, it's been quite different forever, where the senior leaders quite often are involved in the process, even interviews and things like that around an internal complaint or issue. Now, in Staffordshire, we've been bringing in independence. The chief and the deputy have been bringing in independent advice to conduct some of those interviews for over 18 months now. And this is the direction of travel. Whether we can end up with a regional team that looks after multiple fire and rescue complaints and claims of discrimination, I don't know, but that's the type of direction I'd like to go in, so it's cost effective. But we're sort of ahead of the game. Chairman, I suggest that we share with you, if you've not already had it, that thematic report, because it does make interesting reading. Quite rightly, the now Police, Crime and Fire Minister, she chaired the Home Affairs Committee, I believe, or Scrutiny Committee in London, and heard some of the stories about fire and rescue behaviour last year and flipped a lid, and she was quite right to, which is hence this piece of work. We're in a very, very good place, I would say, with this. The other report I mentioned is the recent full report, which please read. 1 outstanding, 6 goods, 4 adequates for Staffordshire Fire and Rescue. That is where we want to be. And it mentions in there not only the robustness, productivity, but also promoting values and culture as good. That is where we want to be.
Okay. Okay.
Is the microphone on? Yeah. Commissioner, firstly, I want to start by congratulating on a positive report, but I want to continue on the theme of the fire service. And I always have some, I sometimes think there's a slight possibility that some parts of reports can fall into that well-known axiom, what gets measured gets managed. And so with that in mind, and for my assurance, I'd like to focus on the firefighter and rescue service for today's section. So I've got a couple of questions. So given the recent pilot of the 3-person crewing for on-call staff since June 2023, which has shown an average increase of 11% in on-call appliances availability and a significant reduction in response times, how assured are you about sustainability of this approach in the long term, especially considering the ongoing challenges in recruiting and retaining on-call firefighters? I've got a couple, so do you want to answer that one first, or shall I carry on?
Yes, please, yes. Thank you. And apologies, sir, where are you from again?
Cannock Chase.
Cannock.
Yeah, so I'm Councillor David Williams from Cannock Chase.
Nice to see you again. The 3-person crew, we've talked about it at this panel 2 or 3 times. The missed opportunity for the last review. Let me just give you the latest. So this is as of September. Apologies, because these numbers have moved. So just first of all, the reflection in the recent plan of this, and primarily it was about getting on-call crews, first of all, more actively engaged, which means we retain them. They're doing more of what they want to do. The potential for on-call crews to be at an incident in support of colleagues or in support of whole-time crews, so more safety at each incident, and the potential to get to an incident quicker. These are the things that the service is seeking to achieve through this pilot. So, HMI recognise on-call availability is improving. They're extremely interested in the trial because it's putting communities first, and there were no concerns raised from crews through the inspection. Incident commanders are well trained to support and control the incidents, and there's a culture of staff where they feel comfortable to challenge at all levels. In the middle of September, they attended 587 emergency incidents, mobilised 389 occasions for cover. So that's not incidents, it's going to another station to be there in readiness for a call out with the team having already left to an incident. The crews have felt safe and confident. There's not been a formal issue raised. And the key thing, the three-person crew which arrives first at the scene is 9 minutes 45 seconds quicker than the next fully crewed appliance. So this is about getting to situations sooner, more frequently, retaining officers, on-call firefighters, increasing our chances of recruiting. And I'm pleased to say this year we've increased the headcount by 23. Now that's good news because it's been really hard work to increase our on-call firefighter crews in recent years. And I believe since we last met, Chair, we've extended the type of incidents that they're going to in the pilot to include road traffic situations. So the pilot's continuing. I'm absolutely comfortable with the direction of travel, but I don't want to prejudge the outcome of that. And the key for me is it's all being done in consultation with the crews themselves, with the firefighting teams.
Okay.
But it's feeling very positive at the minute and enhancing safety for the communities.
Okay. Can I follow up?
Carry on, yes.
Okay. No, thank you for that. So just focusing on the trial itself. So my understanding is that a crew can't enter a burning building with breathing apparatus if there's only 3 crew there. Is that correct? So with this three-person trial, my understanding is that the crew wouldn't be able to go into a burning building with breathing apparatus if they were called out to a scene. Is that correct?
The pilot is on the basis that a crew of 3, if they're first in attendance at a house fire, would not typically tackle that themselves. Now, there is a caveat there in that the firefighters can make operational decisions in the interest of safety at any incident. I think there may have been, I would need to just confirm the details of this and happy to do that back to the panel. I think there may have been one incident when a team did attend and they made a rescue on the basis of their own professional judgment, but that is not the basis on which the pilot is being run. In the main, if a 3-party crew is first at a house fire, they will endeavour to make the area safe, prepare equipment, essentially make the operational team that follows on enhance their capacity to deal with the situation. But I do think in the last, getting on for 15 months now, there has been one incident where a crew did engage in one of those situations. Is it possibly that one you're referring to? Or you've been made aware of?
I mean, I'm not a firefighter, but if I've appeared on a scene of an incident like that, it'd be very difficult for me to wait for the cavalry to come over the hill. So and the statistic isn't now about how long it takes for that next crew from wherever they are in Staffordshire to get there. So my next question really was around the measures that have been implemented with the service to consistently meet the operating demands without compromising that firefighter safety or the public safety, and how do the current safety protocols balance that need for immediate action with the safety of the firefighter and the citizens, because there is a balance there, and obviously firefighters are managing risk. I'll
just come back again on that. I think the the strongest argument or concern, particularly of the Fire Brigades Union, the national union, which is the biggest, who have a position of absolute resistance to this three-party crewing. Is this what they call the moral dilemma? That a firefighter may feel obliged in a situation like that. I think that is a very reasonable argument, and it's the primary reason for the pilot to try and understand the nature of the incidents that firefighters are addressing, and to establish clear expected action. The difficulty is, if you like, or the balance to be struck, as you call it, is that firefighters do have, as I understand it, the authority to make a decision of that nature. So it's quite tricky, and any firefighter will tell you about situations where they know colleagues who've jumped into frozen lakes to drag people out, but they shouldn't have, or they've done X, Y, Z, and they shouldn't have, and yet they've saved a life. So there will always be that situation. In fact, there'll always be that situation at almost every incident they attend. I would suggest that they might do something that they know is risky, and that's partly why we admire them so much. On the other hand, we should not be obliging people to make uninformed decisions. So the pilot's very clear at the moment, house fires not to be tackled by crews of 3, but there may well be exceptional circumstances where they make a local decision. That is the nature of their job.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Just follow up. Just
Okay,
just
one more.
Yeah, just one more, and that'll be me. So yeah, no, thanks for that. I understand that. So obviously the trial's running on, so there's been no incidents of those whatsoever of, I guess, of firefighters being in moral dilemmas to go against protocol to enter buildings.
I believe there's been one incident.
Yeah.
My understanding is they did, that there was a life saved, and that incident is currently being reviewed. And I'm quite keen to understand exactly how it occurred, the nature of it, what the decisions were. But that's not the basis of the pilot, no.
No, so how are you sort of measuring that outcome and that consultation? So obviously it's run for over a year now, if my understanding is right.
Yes, it's got a little while to go yet, and then the service will present to me.
So there's been no interim consultation as this pilot's been going on?
It's constant consultation with the staff.
Okay.
Constant.
So you're saying there's no issues then? If it's been
At the moment, I'm
consultation?
extremely comfortable, but I am aware that there was one, I believe there was one case where at a house fire, a team of 3 intervened and saved a life, but it's currently live and being reviewed. Okay. So I'm going to wait for the officers and the professionals to come back to me with their conclusions on that.
And there's been no reports of well-being or any psychological stress regarding on-call firefighters or the 3
No,
crew?
there isn't. There isn't.
None whatsoever.
There isn't. Chairman, I do appreciate that this is an issue and a concern for people. I also appreciate that there's an organisation nationally that doesn't want this to happen. And they will continue to make statements to some degree, unfortunately, that are not true. They'll continue to make them in public forums. And I had to call one out up in Newcastle. They will continue to inform very important stakeholders who subsequently become MPs of things to the degree that fire and rescue services are in special measures in Staffordshire when they're not. So there is a lot of interest in this, and I think it's important that we, certainly I, look at the facts and pay due heed to our local firefighters and staff. The situation at the moment is there's a pilot that's ongoing. I am assured of its safety. I'm certainly assured at the moment that it is delivering results and improving safety for the residents of Staffordshire to the degree of hundreds of incidents. But there is one which is currently being reviewed. I've had a very positive outcome, but it's being reviewed, and I suggest that I bring the detail back to yourselves at the panel so we can understand it.
Okay, let me just step in at that point. Councillor Williams, can we leave it at that?
Well, he's just made almost a political statement there.
Well, no, I don't
around
want to take that
Fire
any...
Brigade Union.
I don't really want to take that any further at the moment.
Well, I think that's what he's just done. So personally, I feel that I'm a layperson, not a firefighter, reading a report. There's an issue with recruitment and retention of firefighters, and this is a method of solving those statistics. We can reduce the time for getting a crew to a scene, but there's a risk of that crew then. And what you've been telling me is then the moral obligation and their professional judgment, they can break their protocols and enter that building. That's what I understand.
Councillor Williams, just let me intervene here because we do have an agenda to get through.
Of course.
May I ask the Commissioner if he would come back, perhaps with a letter addressing the points that have been raised?
Yes, Chairman, if that's the way you'd prefer. Very, very happy to come back and discuss that particular
Well, there's obviously
issue
a
in
strength
detail.
of feeling there, and this panel want to make sure that everyone is heard, and you will listen and you will respond because that's the way you operate.
Absolutely.
And I would hope that we can satisfy Councillor Williams perhaps with something in writing as soon as possible.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, it's not just Councillor Williams. As the Commissioner has indicated, we've raised this issue on several occasions. So it's not about satisfying Councillor Williams, it's about satisfying the whole panel. And obviously, if there is an incident, as Councillor Williams has spoken about, then we need to know the details and whether there was any adverse effects. I mean, we're not talking about, you know, a firefighter necessarily being trapped in the building, but we're talking about the mental health aspects of that incident. So I do think that, you know, it's something which the trial is not yet over. It is an issue we've raised, and we need to see it as an ongoing issue. So it's not just about having a letter to resolve Councillor Williams' concerns. It's actually about this panel observing this trial and making sure that we're satisfied with the outcomes.
Okay. Have you any more to say, Commissioner?
Not really, Chairman. I'm very happy to continue to bring this pilot back and discuss it in full detail, as I've said. It's too important. It's too important for the safety of the public, and it's too important to those firefighters that want to be active, build their experience, and save people.
Right, so we do have that a commitment from the Commissioner to come back on that subject. Charlotte, is it just one more point you wish to raise? Not on that issue, on a different issue. Okay.
I'm just a bit confused. On page 29 of our pack anyway, it talks about 56% of 101 calls being resolved in an average of 4.33 minutes. Do you mean triaged or do you mean resolved? Because it just seems to me that to resolve an issue that has been raised in 4.5 minutes, I don't know how that can be done in 4.5 minutes.
That's the team at the triage point. What we find with 101 is it's not just people reporting incidents or crimes. It's quite often people asking for information. Who do I contact? How do I contact so-and-so? The problem before, 3 years ago when I arrived, is that those calls were all waiting for the same final call handler. So by dealing with it at triage point, nearly 60% there, they're just dealt with. You know, call so-and-so, I'll ask so-and-so to phone you back. Yes, I can see there's an appointment booked in. It's that type of situation. And then it's the others where they go on to the call handler to take their details about the incident. Generally managed quickly, but sometimes not when the demand's too high. And that's where I really want to see that average time come down.
Right, thank you. Are there any more questions at this point on this topic? Right. Can we move to agenda item 7 then, please? Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'm hoping that you and all your colleagues have had a copy of the draft police and crime and fire and rescue plans. Those are now out to consultation. I believe I provided you with a paper. I've got too many papers today. Let's see if I can find... Here we go. Just detailing the nature of the consultation, which is going to run for several weeks. It's key that I get feedback from members of the public, but also stakeholders, yourselves, which I'm very keen to hear today if you get the opportunity. And we're going to be putting that out via social media and various other forums. You can see the questions we're acting there, which go to the core of the plans. As I've talked about already, let's keep working on 101, let's keep responding effectively, talking about visibility and confidence, building strong relationships, support of victims, the way that we work with others to do that, which is absolutely crucial, prevention and protection, which is a theme you've already brought up with me, and then this key area, particularly with the police and crime one, around impactful partnerships. I'm quite keen to keep supporting local community partnerships, and by that I mean funding them, directly funding them, which is not the same, not done around the rest of the country at the minute. At the same time, I want that dealing with crime, ASB and confidence. So there's a bit of work for us to do with councillor colleagues on that. And in fire and rescue, particular emphasis on more of what we've been doing with the NHS. And I'm keen to get into some conversations with West Midlands Ambulance about first responder requirements. Our on-call firefighter team, as I've mentioned, they're really keen to do as much as possible of what they've been trained to do. They think there's a role in some remote areas of the county to help as first responders. It's a bit too difficult in West Midlands because of the training that the ambulance service are expecting them to do. So we're looking around the country, seeing some examples elsewhere where that can happen with a day or two's training rather than a week or two's training, which largely replicates what they've already done anyway. And I'm hoping to make some progress with that. But the key thing, I think, is some of the differences in the plan. Firstly, you'll see references to retail crime, which is a concern of local people. They do not want to lose their community shops, and they do not want people serving them abused. Vehicle crime continues to be a concern right across the county, although the service have made some really positive interventions and been reducing that quite consistently in the last 9 months or so. And also rural crime, as I mentioned before. That is a focus, primarily in terms of dealing with it and then communicating that we've dealt with it and being in touch with businesses and individuals to help them protect their assets and prevent crime continuing. But essentially, these plans are about building on what we're already doing, building the strength of the organisations, investing, using technology where we can, making sure they've got the resources they need, and meeting those local expectations. I'm not letting up on road safety because it's too important, and the roads policing progress, I think, supports some positive work. But really keen to hear what you and your colleagues think, Chair, because this is fundamental to the next 4 years. As I've said, the services are bound to take account. This doesn't direct police and fire, by the way. There's been some confusion in a recent report looked at this. Chief constables are not held to account on this report, on my plan. Certainly it's part of our conversation, but they will look at evidence, they'll look at national issues, they will rightly, along with me, have focus on knife crime, violence against women and girls, other national concerns, and they will be evidence-led. But this is a reflection of what the communities have been telling me in Staffordshire. Rural, retail, vehicle, confidence, visibility, answer the phone, these things matter to people in Staffordshire. So that's why they're there.
Okay, yes, thank you. A couple of observations from me at this point. Knife crime, of course, is something that's in the national press every day and a major concern to the public. And at times, when you see the extent of the injuries that have been caused, it just seems such an insurmountable problem. And how the heck would the police deal with it? So we'd expect to see that on the agenda and perhaps up it at some stage, because people are getting fearful now. You might want to challenge a young person or anyone as to why you're doing that to my car, and what you don't want to do is be confronted by a 12-inch machete telling you to go away before I stab you or something like that. So the public perception of it, and the public need to understand what's going on. And there's something around the storage in the home of electric scooters on the fire service topic as well, because we do hear about some of those being catching fire and causing unnecessary, well, desperate damage to property. So that's something else that people are concerned about. And I noted in the report from the fire service, I don't know whether I was disappointed or not, but very few words about climate change and the challenges that go along with that, and how the fire service are going to have to step up, perhaps, on top of all their other duties to address climate change related issues. Flooding is the one that springs to mind, of course. And I don't think there's any particular obligation on them to go out and deal with it, but they do. So I wonder whether that's a challenge that's going to be looked at in some details. Colleagues, any further questions on that point, on any of those points? Perhaps you'd come back then, Commissioner, on the points I've just made a brief reference to.
Yes, thank you. Really very helpful, even that initial feedback, but anything that you can feedback as a panel in the next few weeks would be greatly appreciated. Knife crime is a concern. As you say, public perception is actually part of the challenge. I can't remember the exact percentage, but I think it's around half of all knife crime is actually linked to some sort of domestic situation. It's not typically, it's very rarely involves two people who are strangers to each other. It's more often, even with young people, those that are somehow being involved in a drug crime or other activity. Terrible stuff, because they're quite often being asked to protect their corner, their patch, their piece of business, as it were. So it is an absolute fundamental business as usual concern for Staffordshire Police. It's part of the violence reduction work that me and my team get involved with. There's conversations at the moment with government. Again, there's a bit of uncertainty around at the moment the serious violence duty, which was brought in about 2 years ago, with some funding to assist bring violence down across the country and not just in high violence areas. Some of that funding and governance is routed through myself, and I think we've been quite effective. We've got bleed kits in all police and fire and rescue vehicles now. We're raising perception around the risk of knife crime. Got PSHE coordinators in schools, assisting schools in explaining the risks of knife crime. There's a suggestion that that might be routed through the local authorities. I'm not too convinced that that's going to place it in the right spot for the violence reduction that we need to continue. And it's wider than knife crime. It actually goes into some of the addiction stuff you mentioned earlier. But yeah, it's a priority for the service, and it is for me. But Staffordshire is not, thankfully, suffering to the degree that other places are. It's just that every single individual incident is so terrible. That young man in your neck of the woods, Chairman, I met his family that was killed in at the party in Derbyshire 2.5 years ago. His family were instrumental in not that I needed much convincing, but they certainly helped to convince myself and the Chief Constable about the bleed kits in all of the police and fire vehicles. So it remains a priority there. The electric scooters is an interesting one. This keeps coming up. It is a concern. It is illegal. I think this is fundamentally for the police to enforce where they get the opportunity. I think we could do with a bit of clarity from nationally around pilot schemes and various other bits and pieces that people get confused about. It's I'll give some thoughts to whether that needs to be highlighted in the plan specifically, because it is quite unique. Fire climate change, again, I'm just going to read through the plan again, see if I've given that enough weighting. It is very important. I nearly got stuck in a flood myself on the way here. I thought I was going to have to phone you and say I was knee-deep in water. As you will know, at the moment, the Fire and Rescue Service is not statutorily obliged or paid to deal with flooding. It does so, of course it does, and it gets involved largely with partners. I think it should have an opportunity actually to be properly funded and resourced, for the organisation to be properly trained as well and backed up to tackle flooding. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And I think to have a go-to agency would actually assist as well. But got to be really careful that we don't see this as a problem that's fixed by response of a fire service. Gullies, drains, sewers, our water companies, councils, farmers, highways, planning, it's all involved in accentuating the risk of flooding. So for me, that's more of a partnership deal, but I'll check that that's emphasised. The thing that has come to me quite a lot through community contact is concern around battery electric storage sites. These are a particular issue. Again, I think there's a challenge for government in getting the balance right between ensuring we can keep the lights on and not building a battery electric storage site in every bit of every corner of a farm in Staffordshire, particularly because as it stands, I don't believe the authorities are taking enough attention of fire recommendations about being able to access those sites. I'll leave it there, but there's a story, I think, just to emerge around how effective we are working together to make sure that if fire and rescue do need to attend one of those sites, they can do so quickly and safely.
Yes, and I was also pleased to see the reference under the heading of safe buildings and infrastructure. The focusing comment, of course, is always Grenville Tower, and that gets a mention here. And I know in East Staffordshire there are many houses of multiple occupation. Well, I'm not talking about tower blocks as Grenville Tower, but that's a drumbeat message. Once you have houses of multiple occupation, whether it's 20 stories high or a terraced house somewhere in a town, you need to be vigilant. You've got to keep your eye on it. Okay. Any comments, colleagues? Charlotte.
Yes, I wanted to pick up on the ASB pilot, talking about having community wardens rather than police patrols dealing with antisocial behaviour, and whether you've had any results from that pilot. It's ongoing, because I think that the community response, you know, people in the community seeing a community warden coming along rather than the police officer, might be rather negative. And my second question is, I've been disappointed. I appreciate that police officers are very overstretched, but where we have done, councillors have been meeting with residents to deal with problems of drug dealing and antisocial behaviour in a block of flats, that despite promises, a police officer or even a PCSO has not been in attendance. Because I think many of these residents feel that they're being abandoned, and it is therefore important that there is a police input into those sorts of meetings. You know, a meeting probably lasted, you know, an hour maximum, and it just seems to me that if you are serious about community involvement, it is important to try to make that a priority for police officers.
Thank you, Councillor Atkins. Two things there, really. Yeah, the ASB pilot's been particularly interesting. I was quite keen, and with the Chief Constable, quite keen to bring the wardens in a bit sooner than we could make that happen. It meant that the first year was predominantly police officers on overtime with this pilot. And the locations all experienced gave us very positive feedback, particularly from businesses. But also we're running 2 in urban areas. One's in Burton, one in Florence in Stoke-on-Trent. Just to sort of understand the difference in police rather than wardens in those types of environments. I've been out to see all but one of the warden teams. The response from the public and businesses has been really positive, probably more so than I expected, and I think they did too, to some degree. It's a mix of wardens who do have some enforcement powers, but and that was the issue with getting them in as quickly as I'd have liked, actually, because the Chief Constable has to give those powers to the wardens, and there is a process to be gone through. Nevertheless, they've got enforcement powers, but we've also got a diversionary officer in there as well. So this is the person who will walk straight into a group of young people and start talking about what they might do that's more positive than concerning their neighbours or people on the high street, or approach a group of habitual drinkers and start asking them if they've got the support they need or where they might be going for help and interventions. So, and it's working really effectively. If I had this money and it was guaranteed, I'd just do it all the time, because it not only reduces crime, but it really does have an impact. People see the uniform, it has an impact on confidence. I do appreciate there's going to be a challenge of balancing resources. And I do also appreciate that with the manifesto commitment around neighbourhood policing, which included potentially officers, potentially PCSOs, potentially specials, I'm quite keen to work into that conversation the positive potential for wardens as well, with powers. Now, I would say, I won't mention the authorities, but there's a couple of authorities that are just nervous about the wardens using those powers and generating back office activity in terms of fines, chasing them up, etc. We'll work that through, but what might be useful, Chair, to the panel, is when we do the final report of that activity, we report it back to you. My real objective was, as this was a pilot and it was 10 forces, let's do something a bit different, compare it with what we did with the police, and say, here's an example of what wardens might be able to do for you, and inform the process. And then if 43 forces, which was originally the plan, got the funding, some might say, actually that warden approach works better for us than the police. Overtime isn't the way to do it. There's already a demand on overtime anyway. But the wardens have been effective. I'm just really keen that we can keep them to the end of the period, because they're now knowing that this is a pilot. One or two people saying, I'd love to do that job, but I don't necessarily want to do it knowing there's a 4-month cut-off. So some clarity around that neighbourhood policing model nationally would help us. And hopefully the experience and the detail will inform that. But they've been received well, actually.
Point about police officers coming to community meetings?
If that's happened, I'd be quite interested to know the specifics. If they can't make it, they should tell you in advance. I think promise is slightly different, especially if you've got residents there waiting. I'm sure that they would have wanted to be there. It's a question of what's happened, because, yeah, let me know if you would.
Okay, I think we have a question, one more question.
Yeah, I can only speak from the Newcastle aspect of that. It's been working very well in Newcastle, and they do have weekly meetings with the police and the neighbourhood delivery team. But I understand what you're saying about enforcement powers. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the ones that are funded through your office, they come through an agency. So they could potentially have the same enforcement powers that the neighbourhood delivery team do regarding PSPOs and things like that. So that would be a question for me, because I think certainly in Newcastle it would help to bring them in line with the rest of the team, that they're all working together and having the same powers.
Yeah, I visited the police overtime team, who were really effective in the town centre, and the wardens are equally having a big impact, and they are working together. That's the key. They're eyes and ears, they're briefed together, and the enforcement that's been done in Newcastle has been to quite a high level, actually. There's been plenty of action taken, using their powers around orders, people on bikes, people making a nuisance, etc. So Newcastle's a really cracking example, and when the Home Office is visited, that's where they went, and they were very impressed. So it's great that they're working alongside everyone and the community wardens as well. I think they've got powers around the PSPOs, but if they haven't, that's the type of thing that needs to be wrapped up. In Stoke, we got 3 or 4 different sets of wardens walking around the same area. It doesn't help, really. They could do with being one, wearing the same uniform with the same authority and under one management. But I might be jumping into the world of what I would like in an ideal world rather than what's possible at the moment.
I think there's another question. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if you could give us a rundown on how we're doing on the timeline, and particularly in terms of the communication of the consultation. Yeah. I must admit, I like to consider myself fairly well connected. I read a lot of local media. I'm on social media quite a lot. The first mention I heard of this consultation was in the agenda for today's meeting. Yeah. I spent some time doing a search on the internet. The only mention of the consultation I could find was on your website. And my particular bellwether for local media, Lichfield Live, whilst there is an article about today's meeting discussing the plan, there is no articles about the consultation. So given that we're already 2 weeks into a 5-week process, I wondered how well you felt it had been communicated, what the responses are starting to look like, and whether we shouldn't perhaps extend this timeline to give more chance to reach that local media communication.
Thanks, Mr. Taylor. Well, what are we, 16th September it launched. So we are, yeah, as you say, nearly 2 weeks in. A bit disappointed you've not found it in a search, because I think the communications have gone out to all the stakeholders, and you didn't get one as a councillor.
No, I've just checked my email for both District Council and Burntwood Town Council,
Yeah,
and can find no mention of it.
Okay. Well, I'm getting an update on this, I think today or tomorrow. So I'll just ask that question, because I have asked that every council in particular, but councillors as well, get a direct contact on this. It's so important I hear from you. Where were we last week? 500 responses as of last week, which is pretty good actually. I'm quite pleased with that as a start. Thanks for the nudge. Let me just double check on that. But in the past, this approach has been pretty successful. I would like to be assured that the media organisations are doing their bit to push it out as well. It's interesting, you know, the world's moved on. 20 years ago, you used to go to the local newspapers and bang, everybody knew. Very few people read them now. They'll read Lichfield Live or something like that. And that's where I need to just ask the question of our friends at Lichfield Live and others. Why doesn't Councillor Taylor know about my consultation? Thanks for bringing it up.
Okay, thank you. Right, item 7 on the agenda then was the development plans. The panel have noted them at this stage, Commissioner. So we'll now go to item 8, Fire Safety Plan 2020 to 2024. I think maybe we've touched on quite a few of the entries in that plan.
Yes, I have. And actually, this is the other rolling consultation, which, sorry Louise, I've got that, which the Fire and Rescue Authority are statutorily bound to do as well, what they call their CRMP, Community Risk Management Plan. They made a decision, you might recall, to tie this in with the local fire and rescue plan, which I'm consulting on now to ensure they cover the overlaps. But they're out consulting themselves at the moment. Again, all stakeholders are involved in that. In fact, the bits I wanted to pull out here particularly, firstly, that it's been overtaken by HMI. There's some statements in this report about recent reports and upcoming reports, and of course it mentions some of the progress around areas for improvement. That's all detailed in the latest published inspection, and positively so. And the other thing I wanted to bring up was the 3 crewing, because there's a reference to the information as of July, but we've got ahead of that as well. So happy to take any questions on this. It's a process, really, Chairman, but the CRMP will be with us for everyone to examine alongside my plan in the next few months.
Thank you. Any questions, colleagues?
Councillor Atkins in particular might find, I don't have page numbers, which is pity, but there's a reference here to that thematic report, which might do the job of the info that she requested earlier. So it looks like from 4.48 onwards, there's a good summary there, and the recommendations are detailed. There's a number of recommendations that resulted from that plan. She might find those and yourselves quite useful in terms of what that has asked of National Fire and Rescue Services, and there's some context there from Rob Barber, the Chief, as well, about how we're already progressing some of that.
Yeah. I know you've mentioned several times this morning, Commissioner, the importance of partnership working. And I'm particularly encouraged to read paragraph 437 on page 108, where there are some interesting names there. So that's reassuring as well. Anything else, colleagues, in this section? No? Item 9 on the agenda, questions to the Commissioner. We've asked him 1 or 2 questions this morning. Are there any more questions for the Commissioner? Councillor Williams.
Commissioner, you'll be happy this one isn't really a question, it's a statement. I've just been really encouraged by your talk about collaboration throughout today. I think that's key, you know, local authorities, police, fire, health services and social services. You know, unless we work together, I think some of the challenges that we're going to face over the next few years and decades are never going to be solved if we work together. So that's really encouraging, so thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
Thank you, I really appreciate that. I think we're all guilty, actually, in recent years of thinking that you can look at one organisation and say, can you just fix that for me? It's just not that simple. And in fact, most of my working week is spent with partners. I think it's really interesting to reflect on that disorder in the summer. Clearly, there's no one answer to that. There's no one organisation that is going to, hopefully, work to stop that happening again. It's for all of us. And I think in public service, public sector in particular, the example of what the Fire and Rescue Service are doing, it works for Fire and Rescue around return to home and falls. It works for the public, and it works for the NHS. It is tremendous good value for the NHS. And yet, quite often you're in organisations or organisational meetings where there are barriers. No, this is a job for us to own. And I think the other challenge that was very interesting in last year and still progressing is this idea of right care, right person. And we had some questions from Councillor Atkins, I recall, about this. It's settled particularly well in Staffordshire. And this is the idea that it isn't necessarily a good thing for somebody having a psychotic episode to be sat in the back of a police car. They really do need to have the support of the right mental health expert. And we've heard about domestic abuse advisors being involved in control rooms as part of a new government proposal. That's already happening to some degree in Staffordshire, but that's a positive move. It's recognising where people get the support they need regardless of the barrier. But I think we do forget sometimes our community safety partnerships, they are statutorily bound around prevention of crime, tackling antisocial behaviour and confidence. And I think together we can do a bit more around those areas. Looking forward to seeing coming to Cannock, by the way, because your team do a particularly good job in that space. And it'll be interesting to see what they think about how we do it over the next 4 years.
Any more questions? No? Okay. Item 10 on the agenda is date of future meetings. I think the Commissioner warmed us up in terms of MTFS earlier when he was talking about finance. So the next meeting is the 18th of November, 10 a.m. And I think it's MTFS on the agenda that day. Commissioner?
Thanks. It's going to be, I really appreciate your support through that process. As you know, it's quite intensive. And we will be introducing you to a new S151 officer. What's Heather's surname? Lees. We've been pleased to recruit a woman called Heather Lees. We'll introduce you to her as soon as we can, I believe in November. And she's taking over from Catherine Ross, who I know you were impressed with, and so were we. The county council were as well, so they've had her back. And she's quite senior at the county council. I'm sure she'll do a fine job for them. She's been there before. So Heather will be there to support me, David Greensmith, the Fire S151, and John Bloomer, Police 151. And we'll be doing our best to get the finances in good shape.
Okay. And perhaps just a general question that I wanted to mention earlier. How is your deputy settling in? He's not here today to talk to us about his enthusiasm and his excitement.
He actually, I'm surprised not to see him. He must have been, perhaps he's in one of those floods. He very kindly represented me this morning at a police memorial service at headquarters for officers that we've lost in recent, and staff we've lost in recent years. Dave's doing a fine job, actually. Like Helen, he's going to focus for me on road safety, roads policing. He's also going to pick up vehicle crime, which is linked, but actually more into organised crime than the roads aspect. And Dave and I are working together on the CSP relationships, perhaps how we work with communities around Neighbourhood Watch and other direct work with communities. And we've got a shared determination around reducing antisocial behaviour. So I think David's experience as a counsellor himself has piqued his interest in that partnership space. And if you haven't met him yet, I know Jill has. I don't think anyone else we've been to see you just yet. But when we do, he's really hit the ground running. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Right, at that point then, 11:45, I'll officially close the meeting, and thank you for attending, everyone. Thank you, Commissioner, and your team as well.